Okay, we seem to have Facebook live, I think, and having a problem with YouTube. So just working on that a little bit. It may not be possible to do YouTube, we shall see. Meanwhile, is Facebook working? I don't know. Let's see. Okay, I think some people are finding it on Facebook. That's great. Very good. Facebook is happening. Don't know why YouTube is not. It says it's going live, but it's stuck in a beach ball mode. Give people a little bit of a chance to find it on Facebook. Joe in the Inland Empire, Yehudit. Wonderful, wonderful. Let's see. The sound is off. Good. Hope the sound's off there. So it looks like Facebook is going to work, and YouTube may not work. So let's see, Nina or Elon, if you're watching, maybe put a post on the Facebook page. Where else are we going to do it? That seems like the AT Daily is going to be live on Facebook. At least today, I'm not able to fix the YouTube issue. So I'm just not going to worry about that too much. Hopefully it'll come through. But as you can imagine, I don't have my equipment over here. I was scheduled to be back in LA for this show. Hold on a second, just trying to make a little adjustment here. Okay, YouTube does not seem to be working, so let's just put a notice on the YouTube that that's not working, and I'll just be on Facebook today. So who's in the house? And you saw I didn't have the countdown with the music. I don't have that ability here. I don't have, but yet my regular camera that allows me to stream to both Facebook and YouTube. So it's going to be Facebook. So where are you tuning in from? It's what we always ask people when we start our class. Joe in the Inland Empire, Yehudit in South Carolina, Clay in South Carolina, Bella in Florida. Yehudit says, I can hear you. Thank God. We've got sound. Maurice in Maine. I'm pretty sure I'm not seeing all the comments. But Gordo in Scotland. Hey, Gordo. I'm in the same time zone as you, or more or less. Okay, so, for those of you who might be tuning in for the first time, this is our Class AT Daily that we've been doing for 2,244 days since the Daf Yomi cycle began in 2020. And today's Daf is page 45 here in Tractate Menachot, the 30th volume of the Talmud. We're continuing our journey through chapter 4. And today we're opening Mishna number 3, which I think we're going to complete with God's help, and then open Mishna number 4. Generally speaking, in this chapter, we're talking about, I guess I can move this over here and look at the camera. We've been talking about sacrifices, and specifically the elements of the sacrifices, that if you didn't have all of the elements present, you could still proceed with the elements that you do have, which contrasts with chapter 3, where we were talking about if one element is missing, all of it is disqualified, and you can't move forward with any part of the sacrifice. So we're going to continue here with Mishnah number 3. And of course, I'll just say a word in case people would like to know what it's like to be in Jerusalem right now with the nation at war. Like I said, I expected to be back in LA. I'm here because our movie, Guns N' Moses, had its Israeli premiere at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center, which is 100 meters away from where I'm sitting. It was amazing. We had almost 300 people, absolutely packed house. They loved it. Really great experience. And then we had a premiere in Netanya, amazing experience. And then we were in the Gush, in Gush Etzion, which is over the Green Line, so to speak, in Judea, in Shomron, Yehuda and Shomron. People who really are passionate about living in Israel, even though there's high pressure challenges living in that region. And they come under attack many times. And so a movie about Jews under attack who fight back, like Guns N' Moses was incredibly meaningful in that environment. We had nobody left after the movie. We had a long Q&A, talked a little bit about my background, talked about Maganam, talked about how the movie got made, but also just talked about what it's like to be a Jew today. And, in every generation, they rise up to destroy us, as we read in Passover and the Haggadah every year. We had a bit of a respite after the Holocaust for about 80 years, and now the Jew haters are loud and proud and brazen. But as we're showing at this very moment, we are not victims. And though we're small in number, we're big in heart and courage. And we like nothing more than to live in peace in our small land of our heritage. Israel's very, very small country, about the size of New Jersey. No one is trying to expand Israel. We just want to be left in peace. And Jewish communities around the world would prefer to be left in peace. But if you're going to mess with us, we're not going to be a soft target. Okay, this is not a talk about Guns N' Moses or politics or the war. I just thought I would fill you in a little bit. And by the way, I mention all of this because it could happen while I'm sitting here in my hotel room. So if there's a siren, then I got to go. And I don't think I'm going to be able to continue the class in the miklat, in the shelter. So at that point, we just cut it off and maybe start up again when the siren ends. It's possible I could just take you with me since it's only on Facebook. Maybe that would work. But hopefully there won't be a siren while the class is happening. So that's the situation. It's quite tense here. I'm not stressed. I kind of knew that this could happen when I came. Things have been maybe building up a little bit for some time. And so I was prepared that I might be spending Purim here in Israel. By the way, I'm in Jerusalem. So where you are in the United States, it's still Monday during the day. You're fasting. So people who are fasting, wonderful that you're also learning, incredible. It's not easy. I completed my fast earlier today. And then when nighttime comes, it's Purim for you. So you would think it's already Purim for me, but not in Jerusalem, where we observe Shushan Purim, which is on a day later, right? So here in Jerusalem, they fast on the 13th of Adar, and then on the 14th, it's not Purim. Purim is on the 15th. So tomorrow night here will begin Purim, and that's why I can't teach during the day. It would be through 5 a.m. in the United States. It's just not going to make sense. So tomorrow we won't have class. Then I will be in the midst of Purim on Wednesday, but Purim will be over. The whole thing will be over. I'll moderate my drinking for sure. And so Wednesday night for me, at 10 p.m. for me, we'll teach the class again at noon Pacific on Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, but no class Tuesday. And I don't know how long I'm going to be here. So El Al canceled my flight, has not announced when it will resume flights. It probably will be sooner than the end of the war because there are a lot of Israelis who are trying to get back to Israel during the wars so they can fight, so they can be with their families, so they can be here. And so when El Al is sending out planes to bring Israelis back, I think that it's very possible that they will carry people who are leaving Israel away. So I'm not sure when our schedule is going to go back to normal, but for now, I'm here. I don't have a flight back. We're having this class today on Monday. The next class is Wednesday at noon Pacific. Probably Thursday, same schedule. Then Friday is just not going to work. Because, by the time if I taught before Shavous begins here, it would just be crazy early there. But everybody here is taking everything one day at a time. So what we know is we have class right now. It's going to be noon Pacific on Wednesday and probably noon Pacific on Thursday. And check the Facebook page of Accidental Talmudist for announcements. Okay, that's a lot of prelude. Let's get back to the daf. So, Mishnah number 3, it's at the bottom of page 44b. And our daf today is page 45, here in chapter 4 of Tractate Menachos. And by the way, I didn't bring my Gemara with me, my volume of Menachos with me, because I thought I'd be back to teach it. But I stopped to visit my friend. You might notice this is a little larger than the one I use at home. To visit my friend Meni Steinsaltz. We are reading the commentary and elucidation in the Koren Talmud of Rav Adin Steinsaltz. Meni is his son. He's a close friend of mine. And I stopped in the Steinsaltz Center. We had a nice chat, smoked a cigar. And I told him I was thinking about teaching the class. I didn't have my Gemara with me. He's like, take one. It's a brand new, full-size volume of Menachos, courtesy of the Steinsaltz Center and Meni Steinsaltz. Big thanks to them and to him. Okay, Mishnah number 3 in chapter 4. I don't have my stand. I don't have my light. I'm just going to stop complaining. Okay, Mishnah 3. Failure to sacrifice one of the bulls, the rams, the sheep, or the goats of the additional offerings brought on festivals, known as the Musaf offerings, does not prevent the sacrifice of the others. Right? So this is in this chapter where if something is missing, you can still proceed. So Rabbi Shimon says, if the temple treasurers had sufficient funds for the numerous bulls that are required to be sacrificed on that day, but they did not also have sufficient funds for the accompanying libations, they should rather bring one bull and its libations, and they should not sacrifice all of them without libations. I'm just going to do something here. This YouTube that's not working, you don't have access. I can't even stop it. Okay. Interesting. Just trying to turn it off so that people aren't looking for that YouTube feed and not getting it. But I guess I'll just close the browser, leave. Okay. Okay, that's the Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 4, the Gemara. The Gemara asks, with regard to these bulls, rams, and sheep that are mentioned in the Mishnah, on which festival are they offered? Right? We're talking about Musaf offerings, additional offerings. Why additional? Because there's the daily offerings that are offered every day in the Holy Temple. And then on a festival, there are additional offerings. Just like on Shabbos, there are additional offerings. And on Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month, there are additional offerings. So now the Gemara asks, with regard to these bulls and sheep and rams mentioned in the Mishnah, which festival are we talking about? If we say that these are the offerings of the festival of Sukkot, this is difficult. It is written with regard to those days that their offerings must be brought, quote, according to their ordinance. See, for example, Numbers 29:18. And Numbers 29:33, where it says, according to their ordinance, same phrase. And this indicates that no deviation from the Torah's prescription is possible. So rather, the Mishnah must be referring to the 2 bulls, 1 ram, and 7 sheep of the new moon of Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of a month, and the holiday of Shavous, right? Shavous, which we celebrate in Sivan, the giving of Torah. But it's also when we bring, we've talked about so many times in this tractate, the 2 loaves and the 2 rams, when we start eating wheat from the new crop. So rather, the Mishnah must be referring to the 2 bulls, the 1 ram and 7 sheep of the new moon and Shavous, as mentioned in the book of Numbers, 28, verses 11 and 27. Now, it's interesting here, when we talk about the 4th book of the Torah, the Hebrew name is Bamidbar, in the wilderness. The English name, the translation, is the book of Numbers. And it's interesting that, how did that end up being the name? Well, here in the Talmud, it's actually being called the book of Numbers, referring to what we normally call Bamidbar. Why is it called the book of Numbers, even in Hebrew? As a kind of alt name, because of the census that they take twice in the 4th book of the Torah. Okay, now we're at the top of 45a. So the Gemara asks, the Mishnah mentioned rams in plural. On which festival are multiple rams offered? If the Mishnah is referring to the additional offerings sacrificed on those days of the new moon and Shavous, as prescribed in the book of Numbers, these offerings include only 1 ram, not 2. Why would it talk about rams, plural? Not 2. And if it is referring to the 2 rams of Shavous that accompany the 2 loaves, and recall that we've had a discussion already, what is the primary offering of Shavous? Is it the 2 rams or is it the 2 loaves? Are the loaves accompanying the rams, which is normally, a meal offering would be accompanying an animal offering. The animal offering would be primary, but it seems that on Shavous, perhaps the loaves are primary and the 2 rams are additional offerings, accessory offerings, shall we say, to the 2 loaves. That's not what we're arguing about here. But if we're talking about multiple bulls or rams, it seems like it's suggesting that we're talking about Shavous. Wait a minute. Right, if it is referring to the 2 rams of Shavous that accompany the 2 loaves as prescribed in Leviticus, or Vayikra in Hebrew, a term of being, right? This, the verb that is used is a verb of being, that it is this way, and that implies that all the rules have to be following, and so if something is missing, it can't be that the rest could be offered without it, right? Leviticus, a term of being is written about them in the verse, quote, I don't know what's going out in the hallway. They shall be a burnt offering to the Lord in Leviticus 23:18. So this term indicates that the offerings must be sacrificed exactly as prescribed in order to be valid. Consequently, one may not sacrifice fewer than 2 rams. So the Gemara answers, and so how could it be that our Mishnah is telling us that you could do a sacrifice of less than the prescribed number of animals and it's still valid, or you can proceed with the other ones? If the Torah has told us that it has to be done exactly this way, all the animals or all the loaves or all the rams have to be offered. That's the contradiction. So the Gemara answers, actually, it is referring to the 2 rams of Shavous that are prescribed in Leviticus, and this is what the Mishnah is saying. Failure to sacrifice the rams that accompany the 2 loaves, as prescribed in Leviticus, does not prevent the sacrifice of the ram of the additional offering prescribed in the book of Numbers. I mean, this is making me bananas. It's like an ugly wind chime outside. I don't know where it's coming from, but I gotta just ignore it. Hopefully it's not disturbing the microphone. Jacob says, what's going on in the hallways? Purim festivities. Maybe. Okay. Okay. So the Gemara answers, actually it is referring to the 2 rams of Shavous that are prescribed in Leviticus. And this is what the Mishna is saying. Failure to sacrifice the rams that accompany the 2 loaves, as prescribed in Leviticus, does not prevent the sacrifice of the ram of the additional offering that is prescribed in the book of Numbers. And similarly, failure to sacrifice the ram of the additional offering that is prescribed in the book of Numbers does not prevent the sacrifice of the rams that accompany the 2 loaves as prescribed in Leviticus. But the Gemara challenges this understanding, saying, but if that is the explanation, then when the Mishnah mentions bulls and sheep, it means that even the bulls or sheep of the additional offering prescribed in the book of Numbers do not prevent each other from being sacrificed, i.e. the inability to sacrifice one of the bulls or sheep does not prevent one from sacrificing the rest. But when the Mishnah mentions rams, it is the rams mentioned here in Leviticus that do not prevent sacrifice of the rams mentioned there in the book of Numbers, and vice versa. But the failure to sacrifice one of those rams in Leviticus does prevent sacrifice of the other. So consequently, although the Mishnah mentions bulls, rams, and sheep together, the law is not the same with regard to these different animals. It's like there are different groups of animals that are being brought for different reasons, and there's going to be different requirements. So the Gemara responds, the Tana, the Mishnah teaches each statement individually, i.e. the law applies to each of the animals listed in a different manner. Next topic, the Gemara cites a baraisa. A baraisa is a teaching contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but a little bit less authoritative, but from which we learn quite a bit about the Mishnahs. So the Gemara cites a baraisa with regard to the offering sacrificed on the new moon, right? The Rosh Chodesh offerings at the beginning of a new Hebrew month. And the verse states, and on the day of the new moon, a young bull without blemish and 6 lambs and a ram, they shall be without blemish. Now, this sounds a little bit like the Torah instructions on how to bring animal offerings in the Holy Temple, and we haven't done this in 2,000 years, but when the temple was standing, right, this sounds like a law about how to bring these offerings. That would be listed in the Torah, but this is not from the Torah. This verse is from Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a prophet, and normally halachas, right, laws, commandments, mitzvahs. Halachas is the wrong word here. Mitzvahs, the commandments are all in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. But we can look into the books of the prophets to clarify the commandments that are in the Torah, and this is one such case. Right, so in Ezekiel 46:6, the verse states, and on the day of the new moon, a young bull without blemish, and 6 lambs and a ram, they shall be without blemish. And the Baraisa asks, why does the verse state a bull when the verse in the Torah requires 2 bulls? As it is stated, and on your new moons, right, when a new month begins, you shall present a burnt offering to the Lord of what? Of 2 young bulls, 1 ram, 7 lambs of the first year without blemish. So here we're talking about, in Ezekiel, a young bull and 6 lambs and a ram. But in the Torah, it says 2 young bulls, 1 ram, and 7 lambs of the first year without blemish. So the Baraisa answers, since it is stated in the Torah, with regard to the offering of the new moon, 2 young bulls, one might think that it is not acceptable to bring fewer than 2 bulls under any circumstances. From where is it derived that if one did not find 2 bulls, but he found 1 bull, that you still bring the 1 bull? How do we know that? Therefore, the verse in Ezekiel states a young bull in the singular to teach that even if one has only 1 bull, it should be sacrificed. And the Baraisa discusses the continuation of the verse in Ezekiel, which mentions 6 lambs. Why does the verse state only 6 lambs when the verse in the Torah requires 7? And the Baraisa answers, since it is stated in the Torah with regard to the offering of the new moon, 7 lambs, one might think that it is not acceptable to bring fewer than 7 lambs under any circumstances. From where is it derived that if one did not find 7 lambs, he should still bring the 6 that he has? Therefore, the verse in Ezekiel states 6 lambs to teach that in the absence of all 7, one should still sacrifice the 6 if he's got them. And from where is it derived that if he did not find 6 lambs, he should bring 5? And if he did not have 5, he should still bring 4. And if he didn't have 4, but he has 3, he should bring those 3. Or if he didn't have 3, but he has 2, he should bring those 2. And then even if he could not find 2, but he has 1 lamb for a sacrifice that the Torah says bring 7, but he only has 1, should he still bring the 1? Yes. And how do we know that? Therefore, the next verse in Ezekiel states, and for the lambs as his means suffice, indicating that one should bring however many lambs he is able to bring. And the Gemara asks, but once this is written, why do I need the previous verse to state 6 lambs, indicating that if one does not have 7, he should bring 6? And the Gemara answers, it teaches that although the minimum obligation is satisfied with even 1 lamb, nevertheless, to the degree that it is possible to seek more lambs, we seek them. So it's not that, okay, if you don't have 7, you can do with less than 7. Well, I have 6, and I can do with less than 7, I'll just bring 1. No, if you've got the 6, bring the 6. Now the Gemara asks, the Gemara presents another law derived from these verses. And from where is it derived that failure to slaughter some of the required 2 bulls and 7 sheep of the additional offerings on Shavous prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the others? And the Gemara answers that the verse states, they shall be, Numbers 28:31, and the term they shall be indicates that the offerings must be brought precisely as prescribed with respect to this aspect of the whole group of offerings. Okay, next topic. The Gemara discusses the meaning of another difficult verse in Ezekiel. Now that we've brought up some verses in Ezekiel that it's not obvious on their face what it means, we're just going to look at some other verses in Ezekiel that aren't necessarily about the subject that we've been studying. We're going to stay with offerings. So says the Lord God, in the first month, on the first day of the month, you shall take a young bull without blemish, and you shall purify the sanctuary. We're still talking about offerings, but what is this business about purify the sanctuary? V'chiteta. In Ezekiel 45:18. So the Gemara asks, since this verse speaks of the first of Nisan, which is a new moon, why does it state, you shall purify, chiteta, which indicates the sacrifice of a sin offering, chiteta, purifying through a chatas, or chatat, let's say. When, in fact, each of the two bulls sacrificed on the new moon, is a burnt offering, right? It seems like we're talking about a chatat, a sin offering, but the bulls that are brought on Rosh Chodesh are not in the chatat category, they're in the ola, the burnt offering category. That seems to be a contradiction. To answer this question, Rabbi Yochanan says, this passage is indeed difficult. And in the future, Eliyahu Hanavi will interpret it. When Elijah the prophet comes to tell us that Mashiach is coming, he will also answer these questions that have gone unanswered for so much of our history. These dilemmas that have been raised by the sages that they're not able to answer because the answer is just not there in the text. But Rav Ashi says about this dilemma, we can answer it. It is possible to explain that this verse is not referring to the additional offerings sacrificed on the new moon, but rather to the offerings of the inauguration that they sacrificed later in the days of Ezra, similar to the offerings that were sacrificed during the period of inauguration of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, in the days of Moses. When the temple service was restored in the second temple, that first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, Babylonian exile followed, 70 years. Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians were defeated and destroyed by the Persians. And then the Babylonian exile led us into Babylonia, but Babylonia then became Persia, right? And so the Purim story occurs in that period between the first and second temple in Persia that we are at war with right now, with Purim coming right up. At any rate, what they're talking about here is in part because of or maybe completely because of the events of Purim, Esther, becomes the queen of Persia, and I believe it's her son or her grandson, who authorizes construction of the second temple as the Persian emperor. Right? And so now they build the second temple, and when they build the second temple, it needs to be inaugurated. And so they look back to the inauguration of the tabernacle in the wilderness to know how these initial sacrifices at the inauguration of the second temple would go. Right. So Rav Ashi says it is possible to explain that this verse is not referring to the additional offerings of Rosh Chodesh, but rather to the offerings of inauguration that they sacrificed later in the days of Ezra, similar to the offerings that were sacrificed during the period of the inauguration of the Mishkan in the days of Moses. So the Gemara comments that this discussion with regard to the interpretation of the verse in Ezekiel is also taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda says this passage is indeed difficult, but in the future Eliyahu Hanavi will interpret it. And Rabbi Yosef said to Rabbi Yehuda, this verse is referring to the offerings of inauguration that they sacrificed later in the days of Ezra, similar to the offerings that were sacrificed during the period of inauguration in the days of Moses. And Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Yosef, may your mind be at ease as you have put my mind at ease. Thank you for resolving this dilemma for me. Next question is another verse that is apparently difficult to understand in the book of Ezekiel, where it says in Ezekiel 44:31, the priests shall not eat of anything that dies of itself or is torn, whether it be fowl or beast. Right? So the issue here is if you're talking about a kosher animal, or we couldn't eat it at all, but even a kosher animal, you can't eat it unless it is slaughtered in a kosher manner. Right? This is one reason why Jews don't go hunting. Non-religious Jews could, but a religious Jew, if a deer is a kosher animal, but if you shot it with a gun or a bow and arrow, you would not be able to eat it because it died in a non-kosher slaughter manner. Right? You could trap the deer as long as it wasn't injured severely in such a way that it would die within a year, as long as minor injury wouldn't harm it in this sense, and then you could shecht it, you could slaughter it properly. Okay, so what's difficult about this passage in Ezekiel is that it says, we can't eat animals. It says that priests cannot eat animals that are not slaughtered in a kosher manner. And so the Gemara says, is it only the priests who may not eat an unslaughtered animal carcass, or an animal that was torn and now has a wound that will cause it to die within 12 months? That's a treifa, right? So either a nevela, unslaughtered animal that died some other way, or a treifa has this wound that will cause it to die within a year. Both of these would render it not kosher for eating for any Jew. So the Gemara is saying, why does the passage say priests cannot eat that? No Jew can eat that, right? Is it only priests who may not eat a nevela or a treifa? But an ordinary Jew may eat them. Of course not. In fact, these items are prohibited for consumption by all. So why does the passage in Ezekiel single out priests? Rabbi Yochanan says this passage is indeed difficult, but in the future, Eliyahu Hanavi, will interpret it for us. But Ravina said, no, we can understand it. Ravina said that it was necessary for the verse to emphasize that these prohibitions apply to priests for the following reason. It might enter your mind to say that since pinching, malika, with regard to bird offerings in the temple when they are brought as sacrifices, and then a portion of it can be eaten by priests, so that is not kosher slaughter. Right? Pinching the bird's neck, it's only done in the holy temple and only for bird offerings, but then that would render the animal edible for priests, and only for priests, right? So it might enter your mind to say that since malika is permitted with regard to priests, therefore a nevela or a treifa should also be permitted for them. A bird sin offering is killed by a priest doing this malika. This is not a valid method of slaughter and would generally render a bird or animal a nevela, an unslaughtered carcass, and yet priests are permitted to partake of the bird sin offering. Consequently, one might think that the prohibitions against eating a nevela or a treifa in general don't apply to priests. Therefore, this verse in Ezekiel comes to teach us that no, they may not eat nevela or treifa. It is only bird killed by Malika in the holy temple that is outside the law of shechting, but there is no other exception. Next question. The Gemara discusses the meaning of another difficult verse in Ezekiel, where it says in Ezekiel 45:20, and so shall you do on the 7th of the month for everyone that errs, that makes a mistake, and for him that is simple, so shall you make atonement for the house. Right? So on the 7th of the month, for everyone that makes a mistake in his simplicity, and you need to make atonement in the house, which is the holy temple, okay, that seems to be the law. And so the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the expression, the 7th of the month? There's no holiday that's on the 7th of the month that has a special offering. And so Rabbi Yochanan says the verse must be interpreted as referring to the bull for an unwitting communal sin, which is brought when the majority of the Jewish people have sinned as a result of following a mistaken ruling of the Sanhedrin. So these 7 alluded to in the verse are what? 7 tribes who sinned, right? And what this means is, how many tribes were there? 12, in the sense, there were 12 tribes, right? There were 12 tribes. You could count 13 if you say that the sons of Joseph, Menachot and Ephraim, count as separate tribes, because Jacob counted them that way. And the Levites did not receive a portion of land in Israel. They lived in the Levitical cities. This would work either way. The point being that when 7 tribes have sinned, then the majority of the tribes of Israel have sinned. Whether you count them as 12 or 13, 7 creates a majority. And the reason that this matters is because maybe there's the tribes that have smaller numbers. And so even though only 7 of the tribes, only 7 of the tribes, relied on this mistaken ruling of the Sanhedrin, and they do not constitute a majority of the population of Israel. And because if you took 7 of the smaller tribes, even though it's the majority of the tribes, it could still be a minority of the total population of individuals, since some tribes were much larger than others. What this is teaching you is that we're going to have to bring these special offerings because the majority of Israel relied on mistaken ruling of the Sanhedrin, either because a majority of the numerical population of individuals relied on that ruling and sin, or a majority of the tribes, 7 out of 12. These 7 alluded to in the verse are 7 tribes who sinned, even though they are not a majority of the congregation. And similarly, the word chodesh, month, is to be interpreted as meaning that a bull for an unwitting communal sin is brought if the court innovated, chideshu, a new halacha, new law, contradicting the Torah. Right? They made up something that contradicts Torah by mistake, and then there's going to need to be an offering brought to atone for that mistake. For example, if they said that eating chelev, which is forbidden fat, is permitted. And the continuation of the verse, for everyone that errs and for him that is simple, this teaches that the Sanhedrin is liable to sacrifice the bull for unwitting communal sin only for a matter that was hidden from the Sanhedrin, i.e. about which the Sanhedrin issued a mistaken ruling and accompanied by unwitting action by the majority of the community who relied on the mistaken ruling. If they knew they were changing the law on purpose, which would be a sin, but it would not qualify for this offering because they did it knowingly. There has to be a mistaken rule. Now the Gemara concludes a discussion of specific difficult verses in Ezekiel with the following general statement. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, that man is remembered for good, and Hanina ben Chizkiah is his name. As were it not for him, the book of Ezekiel would have been suppressed and not included in the Bible, because various details of its contents appear to contradict statements of the Torah. What did Hanina ben Chizkiah do? He brought up to his upper story 300 jugs of oil for light, so that he could study even at night, and he sat isolated in the upper story, and he did not move from there until he homiletically interpreted all of those verses in the book of Ezekiel that seemed to contradict verses in the Torah, and he showed how they do not contradict verses in the Torah. Therefore, Ezekiel is a legitimate prophet, and his book could be included in the Bible. Next topic, the Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Shimon says if the temple treasurers had sufficient funds for the numerous bulls that are required to be sacrificed on that day, but they did not also have sufficient funds for the accompanying libations, they should rather bring one bull and its libations, and they should not sacrifice all of them without libations. Right? So better one bull with libations than two bulls with no libations. Concerning this, the sages taught in a baraisa, the verse states, and he shall prepare a meal offering, an ephah for the bull and an ephah for the ram, and for the lambs as his means suffice, and a hin of oil to an ephah. Ezekiel 46:7. And Rabbi Shimon says, is the measure of the meal offering accompanying bulls and rams the same as stated in the verse that it is an ephah of each? In fact, this is not the law, as the meal offering accompanying a bull is 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour, whereas the meal offering accompanying a ram is only 2/10 of an ephah. So rather, the verse teaches that if the temple treasurers had sufficient funds for the numerous bulls that are required to be sacrificed on that day, but they did not also have sufficient funds for the accompanying libations, they should bring one bull and its libations, and they should not sacrifice all of them without libations. And similarly, if the temple treasurers had sufficient funds for the numerous rams that are required to be sacrificed on that day, and they did not also have sufficient funds for the ephah, i.e. for the prescribed measure of flour for all of the rams, they should bring one ram and its ephah of flour, and they should not sacrifice all of them without their ephahs of flour. Right? That's the importance of the meal offerings, that you would give up some of the animal offerings in order to bring the accompanying meal offerings with at least the lesser number of animal offerings. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 4. Now we're on page 45b, and we move on to Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 4. Mishnah 4. On Shavous, there is an obligation to sacrifice burnt offerings, a sin offering, and peace offerings together with the offering of the 2 loaves. Right? So on the holiday of Shavous, what do we have? We have that sort of spotlight offering, the 2 loaves, which we really talk about a lot because now that permits people to start eating from the new crop of wheat. And there are 2 rams specifically accompanying those 2 loaves. Then there are other offerings that are brought that day, and these are in the categories of peace offering, sin offering, and burnt offering. Now, the burnt offerings consist of a bull, 2 rams, and 7 sheep. A goat is brought for the sin offering, and 2 sheep are brought as peace offerings, and these are the ones waved together with the 2 loaves. Now, failure to sacrifice the bull, the rams, and the sheep, which are all brought as burnt offerings, and the goat that is brought as a sin offering, does not prevent the bringing of the 2 loaves, and they are sacrificed nevertheless. Failure to bring the 2 loaves does not prevent sacrifice of the accompanying animal offerings. Would it prevent bringing the 2 rams that are specific to the 2 loaves, those peace offerings? That's a different question. Failure to bring the 2 loaves prevents sacrifice of the accompanying peace offering of the 2 sheep. But failure to sacrifice the 2 sheep does not prevent the bringing of the 2 loaves. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. So he's suggesting that the 2 loaves are primary, so that even if you didn't have the 2 sheep, you could still bring the 2 loaves. Rambam, Maimonides, says that the law is according to Rabbi Akiva. When it comes to laws that pertain only to the temple and are not things we do in modern times, right? No temple in almost 2,000 years. We don't cover those laws in Shulchan Aruch, which is more about practical halachas that we use in our lives. It doesn't include laws of sacrifices. So how do we know where the discussion ended up, what the law ultimately is? For that, we look to Rambam. Rambam agrees with Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas says no. Rather, the opposite is true. Failure to sacrifice the peace offering of the 2 sheep prevents bringing the 2 loaves. But if you don't have the 2 loaves, you still bring the 2 sheep. As we found that when the Jewish people were in the wilderness for 40 years after the exodus from Egypt, they sacrificed the 2 sheep as peace offerings on Shavous without the 2 loaves. Why? Why did they do the 2 sheep without the 2 loaves? Because the 2 loaves are brought from the new crop. And when is there going to be a new crop? When the children of Israel are living in Israel. Right? When they came out of Egypt and we were wandering around in the wilderness, supposed to be 2 years, ended up being 40 years, we weren't planting crops. Right? We were eating manna that God provided free of charge every morning. So bringing the 2 loaves, that didn't start until we arrived in Israel. Right? As we found that when the Jewish people were in the wilderness for 40 years after the exodus from Egypt, they sacrificed the 2 sheep as peace offerings on Shavous, as a peace offering on Shavous without the 2 loaves. As the 2 loaves may be brought only from wheat grown in the land of Israel after the Jewish people entered the land. Here too, whenever the wheat is unavailable, they should sacrifice the 2 sheep without the 2 loaves. However, the 2 loaves are not sacrificed without the peace offering of the 2 sheep, according to Shimon ben Namas. Rabbi Shimon says, not Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas, a different Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, the law is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Namas, that failure to sacrifice the 2 sheep prevents the bringing of the 2 loaves, but failure to bring the 2 loaves does not prevent sacrifice of the accompanying peace offering of the 2 sheep. But, says Rabbi Shimon, the reason for that ruling is not in accordance with his statement. There's a different reason. It's not because we didn't have the wheat in the wilderness. What is it? As all the offerings that must be sacrificed on Shavous that are stated in the book of Numbers, i.e. 2 bulls, 1 ram, and 7 sheep, as the additional offerings, and a goat as a sin offering, these were sacrificed when the Jewish people were in the wilderness. We had the animals, so we brought the additional offerings on Shavous. But all the offerings that are stated in Leviticus, i.e. the offerings accompanying the 2 loaves, the 2 sheep that go with the 2 loaves, right? So they're calling the 2 sheep Leviticus, and all the other offerings the ones from Numbers, right, from Midbar. So that's the distinction, right? Because both are laws pertaining to Shavous, but in Numbers it's all the other animals, and in Leviticus it's the 2 sheep that go with the 2 loaves. Right? But all the offerings stated in Leviticus, i.e. the offerings accompanying the 2 loaves, these were not sacrificed when the Jewish people were in the wilderness. Not only were the 2 loaves not sacrificed, but the accompanying offerings, including the peace offering of the 2 sheep, were also not sacrificed. Why? Because only when they arrived in the land of Israel that these additional offerings and those offerings accompanying the 2 loaves were sacrificed. Neither the additional offerings of Shavous nor the 2 loaves and the offerings that accompany them were sacrificed in the wilderness, contrary to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas. Right? So Rabbi Shimon is saying, when we couldn't do when we didn't have the loaves, we didn't bring the sheep, and we didn't bring any of the other additional offerings either in the wilderness. So rather, Rabbi Shimon says, for what reason do I nevertheless say that the sheep should be sacrificed even without the loaves, which accords with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas? It is due to the fact that the sheep permit themselves. What does that mean? As the sprinkling of their blood and the burning of the portions consumed on the altar renders it permitted to partake of their meat. And why are the loaves not sacrificed without the sheep? It is because there is no item to permit the loaves, as the loaves are permitted only after the sheep are sacrificed. So if you don't have the sheep, you can't bring the loaves. The sheep permit themselves, because once their blood is offered, remember that the altar, the sits, right, the front plate of the high priest atones for offerings that may be lacking or may become impure. So once the blood of the sheep hit that altar, then that renders it permitted to eat the meat, and that renders it permitted to eat the loaves, which are accompanying those sheep offerings. If so, that the animal offerings may be sacrificed. Sorry. I have not been sleeping well with all these siren, go-to shelter events during the war. But I'm happy to be back with you, my friends. Okay, if so, that the animal offerings may be sacrificed, even without the loaves. What is the meaning when the verse states, with the bread? It teaches that they were not obligated to sacrifice the sheep before they were obligated to sacrifice loaves. I.e., they became obligated to sacrifice all these offerings only when they entered Eretz Yisrael. This is the statement of Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Kiva says, one might have thought that the sheep mentioned here in Leviticus, which accompany the 2 loaves, are the very same ones mentioned in the book of Numbers, in the passage describing the additional offerings. And you must say when you reach the bulls and rams that are enumerated in the 2 passages, that the offerings mentioned in one are not those mentioned in the other, as the number of bulls and rams are not equal. Whereas in Leviticus, the verse requires a sacrifice of 1 bull and 2 rams. In Numbers, the verse requires a sacrifice of 2 bulls and 1 ram. So rather, the 2 passages are referring to 2 different offerings. These mentioned in the book of Numbers come upon the altar for their own sake, and those mentioned in Leviticus come upon the altar for the sake of the 2 loaves. It is therefore found that the offerings that are mentioned in the book of Numbers were sacrificed even when the Jewish people were in the wilderness and could not bring the offering of the 2 loaves. But the offerings that are mentioned in the book of Leviticus were not sacrificed in the wilderness due to the fact that the 2 loaves could not be sacrificed in the wilderness since we didn't have a crop of wheat grown in Israel. And the Gemara challenges this and says, but perhaps the bulls and the rams mentioned in Numbers are not those mentioned in Leviticus, but the sheep mentioned in Numbers are the same as those mentioned in Leviticus. And the Gemara explains, from the fact that these bulls and rams are different, it is apparent that those sheep are also different offerings. And the Gemara asks, but from where is it proven that the bulls and rams in Numbers are different offerings than the bulls and rams mentioned in Leviticus? Perhaps they are actually the same offerings. And this is what the Merciful One is saying. If you want, sacrifice a bull and 2 rams, as the verse states in Leviticus. And if you want, sacrifice 2 bulls and 1 ram, as the verse states in Numbers. Maybe it's an option. And the Gemara answers, from the fact that the order of the offerings is different in the 2 passages, as the verse in Leviticus mentions the sheep, then the bull, then the rams, whereas the verse in Numbers mentions the bulls, and then the ram, and then the sheep, right? Not only different number, but different order. From this, one may conclude from it that they are different offerings. Now, the Mishnah teaches, failure to bring the 2 loaves prevents sacrifice of the accompanying peace offering of 2 sheep. But failure to sacrifice the 2 sheep does not prevent bringing the 2 loaves. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Right? He's saying that the loaves are more important. And the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Akiva? And the Gemara answers, he derived the law based upon a verbal analogy between 2 verses. One verse states, and the priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits for a wave offering before the Lord with the 2 lambs. They shall be, Yehiyu, holy to the Lord for the priest, Leviticus 23:20. Now the term, they shall be, Yehiyu, indicates that it is essential that the offering be brought precisely as commanded. But it is unclear whether this is referring to the loaves or to the sheep brought as peace offerings. This is clarified by means of a verbal analogy from the verse, you shall bring out of your dwellings 2 loaves of waving of 2/10 parts of an ephah. They shall be, tihiyana, of fine flour. And the verbal analogy teaches that just as there, the requirement that it is to be done as prescribed is referring to the loaves rather than the sheep, so too here it is referring to the loaves rather than the sheep. And consequently, failure to bring the loaves prevents sacrifice of the sheep, but failure to bring the sheep does not prevent sacrifice of the loaves. And the Gemara asks, and how did Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas, who holds that failure to sacrifice the sheep does prevent bringing the loaves, but failure to bring the loaves does not prevent bringing the sheep, how does he derive his ruling, given what Akiva has told us the Torah says? So he derived the law through a verbal analogy between the verse, they shall be, you, holy to the Lord for the priest, and the verse that states concerning the 7 sheep brought as burnt offerings, they shall be, you, a burnt offering to the Lord. Just as they are the requirement that it be done as prescribed is referring to the sheep, so to here it is referring to sheep rather than loaves. The Gemara challenges and says, and according to Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas, also, we should derive the law based upon a verbal analogy from the word tiyana, as Rabbi Akiva does, and conclude that just as there is referring to loaves, so too here is referring to the loaves. And the Gemara responds, it is preferable to derive the meaning of the term yihiyu from a verbal analogy using the identical term yihiyu, and one should not derive the meaning of the term yihiyu from a verbal analogy using a slightly different syntax of that, existential verb, to be, to is, that it is, but a different syntax of it, tiyana. And the Gemara asks, what difference is there whether or not the words are identical? Didn't the school of Rabbi Yishmael teach a verbal analogy with regard to tsuras of houses, where it says the verse states, and the priest shall return, veshav, on the 7th day. And then another verse, which was necessary for that interpretation, where it says, and the priest shall come, uva, return and come. I mean, those are pretty different words. Definitely look different, right? Veshav and uva. And this returning and this coming had the same meaning. And one can therefore derive by verbal analogy that the law which applies if the tzuras had spread at the conclusion of the first week likewise applies if it spread again by the end of the following week. So certainly if the law can be derived with a verbal analogy with the words veshav and uva, then the slight, much smaller difference between yihiyu and tiyana should not prevent the application of a verbal analogy. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Preparation for this. Okay, I'll just scan the comments. Okay, no problem. Okay, the Gemara answers, this matter applies only when there are no terms that are identical to it. But where there are terms that are identical to it, we derive the verbal analogy from terms identical to it rather than from terms that are not precisely identical. So since you have another verse that has the same verb, why not use that? And the Gemara challenges, and let Rabbi Akiva also derive the meaning of the term yihiyu from a verbal analogy through identical term yihiyu, as Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas does. And the Gemara responds, Rabbi Akiva holds that it is preferable to derive the law concerning an item that is given as a gift to the priest, such as the loaves or the sheep brought as peace offerings, which are the subject of Leviticus 23:20, from the law concerning an item that is also a gift to the priest, i.e. the 2 loaves, which are the subject of Leviticus 23:17. And this is to the exclusion of these 7 sheep that are mentioned in Leviticus 23:18, which are burnt offerings and wholly consumed by the altar. And therefore, there is no gift to give to the priest. Consequently, it is preferable, if we're going to derive a law from another verse, that it has more similarity in that sense. And the Gemara presents an alternative explanation for the basis of their divergent opinions. So a different way to reach those divergent opinions is, and if you wish, say instead that they disagree about the interpretation of the verse itself. They shall be, yihiyu, holy to the Lord for the priest, in Leviticus 23:20. Rabbi Akiva holds, which item is entirely given to the priest? This is the loaves of bread, right? Whereas the animal offerings, part of it goes to the altar and part goes to the priest. And the Gemara, we don't burn part of the bread on the altar. It goes entirely to the priest. And the Gemara asks, and how would Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas respond to this? He would say, well, is it in fact written, they shall be holy for the priest? I'm sorry. Yeah. Is it in fact written, they shall be holy, yihiyu, for the priest? In which case one should interpret it as Rabbi Akiva does. But rather it is written in the verse, they shall be, yihiyu, holy to the Lord for the priest. Therefore, what's the difference? I'm sorry. The difference is they shall be holy for the priest. Does it say that? No, it says they shall be holy to the Lord for the priest. Therefore, it should be understood in the following manner. Which item is partially given to the Lord and partially given to the priest? This is the animal offering, the sheep. Therefore, that's what's important, right? And the loaves are subsidiary to it. That's how Shimon ben Namas comes at a different conclusion than Rabbi Akiva. It's an easier way to get there. And the Gemara asks, and how would Rabbi Akiva respond to this? He would say, is it in fact written, they shall be holy for the Lord and for the priest? It is written in the verse, they shall be holy to the Lord for the priest. Therefore, it should be understood to mean that it is given to the Lord, and it is then given to him entirely for the priests, in accordance with the statement of Rav Huna. As Rav Huna says, the Lord acquired it initially, since it was a sacrifice brought in the temple at the Lord's command. But what did the Lord do with it? He gave it to the priests, right? The loaves are eaten by the priests. And that's where we will knock off. Thank you for being patient with me. As I mentioned at the beginning, I wasn't prepared to do the show here. The war intervened. And so I'm doing the best I can with the equipment that I have here. I didn't want to just go too many more days without teaching. So, but we won't have class tomorrow. Since by then I will be in Purim at night. It's just not going to work out because it's Shushan Purim, right? The next day is Purim here in Jerusalem. So no class tomorrow, Tuesday, but we will resume, God willing, on Wednesday. We'll have class on Wednesday at the same time, noon Pacific, and probably on Thursday as well at the same time, unless Alal tells me I've got a flight home. So we'll just take it day by day. But as far as I know, we will have class again on Wednesday and probably on Thursday at this same time, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Just looking at the comments. Janice says, thank you, Sal, for your dedication to this class. Learning with you today from Jerusalem feels like such a special blessing. Am Yisrael Chai. Stay safe. I mentioned in an earlier post, what stay safe means, among other things, is don't get alert fatigue. We had, especially those first 2 days, so many alerts. The sirens go, leave the room, get to the shelter. Here, it's fortunate in the hotel. I just have to walk through the hotel to the auditorium, but in other places, you have to leave your building, go down the street. And sometimes people get lazy and it's like, it's enough already. I don't want to go. But you never know where these missiles are going to drop, where the shrapnel and debris from interceptions in the sky, and then the broken pieces of the missiles fall, and people get hurt. So go to the shelter. That's what stay safe means. And Bill says, phenomenal technological powers and naturally accompanying gremlins. Okay, and I'm not seeing questions and there may be other, we can barely just hear, I'm sorry about that. I just don't have my normal mic either. I'll try to do a little better when I come back on Wednesday. Hopefully everybody could understand what I was saying. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, see you on Wednesday at noon Pacific. All the best.